Hi, if you clicked here, probably you want to learn a bit more about InnerSource and how to compare it with open source. Today, that's what we're going to discuss. I'm going to go over what are the benefits of InnerSource and some tips on how to try to sell it in your organization. If you're new, welcome. This is Out of DevOps, a YouTube channel where I talk about software engineering. So let's jump into it. And what is InnerSource? So InnerSource is very similar to open source. The only difference is that it's not open to the public. It's only open to internally in your organization. So it's like open source for proprietary software. And what borrows from open source are all the culture of open source. So the culture of collaboration and the way to manage projects. But when we talk about open source, most of the time we think about the code, but open source is the entire ecosystem. It's not just the code. In open source we have things like rules and roles. So the rules, for example, are what you generally find in the code of conduct and in the contribution page in the repo. These are the rules of the game. Then there are roles, different roles for committers, and that generally are called trusted committers. Then you have maintainers and contributors. So there are a few other things. There is a concept of hosts and guests. For each repo you have whoever is responsible for reviewing and approving pull requests is considered a host, and whoever opens the pull request or opens an issue is generally considered a guest. This is important because it also breaks the concept of code ownership. So there is everyone owns the code. There are some people that are the guardian and they are the curators, but not the owners. So this is important because, as we're gonna see later in the benefits, this is one thing that breaks the silo inside the organization. There are a couple of other things that come with the culture of open source, and these are the documentation that most of the time is part of the repo, and also the OSPO, which is the Open Source Program Office, which is essentially the body behind the open source initiative. For most projects you don't see them, but they are the ones that say, okay, this project is going to be public, especially when behind the project there is a private company. Most of the time that project is part of a program and there is a committee inside the organization that defines the rules and the program itself. But let's move on and let's see what are the benefits. So I recently tweeted about the InnerSource and I received an immediate feedback from the InnerSource community. The tweet was about the benefits of InnerSource. I listed 6 of them. You can find them here, but let's see them one by one. So let's start with the first one, which is up the craftsmanship. So for me, this is the most important benefit of the InnerSource adoption, because what happens with creative jobs like in software engineering is that the motivation, especially the intrinsic motivation, doesn't come from the carrot and the stick, but in this case you have intrinsic motivation is the consequence of 3 factors: autonomy, mastery and purpose. And if you look at the open source model, you get all of them in one. So the open source, this is the reason why many people contribute to open source projects without getting paid, because they get that feeling of community, they get the autonomy of doing changes, and also the learning more and becoming an expert, so the mastery. So this is the combination of these 3 factors is essential for having intrinsic motivation. So the next benefit is code mentorship. What do I mean with code mentorship? So through the InnerSource model, you have things like issues and pull requests. And when you start to use issues and pull requests in tools like GitHub or GitLab, you end up with an asynchronous, informal way of communicating and collaborating with other engineers, and it becomes way easier to do code mentorship and learning by collaborating with others, and all this happens with the tool that developers are familiar with. Another massive advantage is the onboarding experience. Most of the time when you join a new company, you feel lost, you don't know where to look for documentation, and most of the time you end up on a Confluence page or any other documentation system that your organization uses that is outdated, but no one tells you because there are 10 additional versions that have been created during the years by other new joiners trying to do the best thing, and you get lost because every time you try to figure out which one is correct, you end up writing a new one that will be outdated in a couple of months. Another benefit is the code documentation. You're gonna have much better documentation because you need to have clear documentation for contributors. So every single time someone wants to contribute to your repo, they need to understand the code, they need to understand the purpose of the system or the service that they have to touch. So this will force you and force the contributors to write clear documentation and also to keep it up to date. And the most important thing is that 99% of the time that documentation is gonna live with your repo, with your code, so you have a single source of truth that gets the benefits of versioning thanks to Git. The other two benefits that I listed in my tweet were about the prioritization input that comes from the consumer of the code, and this is a benefit from product owners that generally tend to prioritize things based on the value that will be produced by that prioritization. So having this feedback directly from the customers is very, very important for them because they can make the right choice at the right time and deliver features that are needed much earlier compared to a traditional approach. In the end, another key benefit of adopting InnerSource is the breaking the organizational silos. This happens because people start to collaborate on the code using tools that they know. And you will see that the adoption of InnerSource will stimulate the team to self-organize and to cross-collaborate. But now let's see what are the best ways to sell this to your organization, to your manager. It depends where you are in your career. So then let's see how we can sell it. And let's discuss three things. So what to sell, how to sell, and how to get the buy-in from management. So the first thing is what to sell. My recommendation is to not try to sell this as a silver bullet or something that you can do by yourself, because you need to build a community and it's not something you can do without the support of your organization. So try to offer your support and not the complete solution, because it's going to be very hard to define an entire solution that doesn't depend on you. And the other thing is probably try to help cultivating the culture. You can start simple. You can start from a simple project that can be documenting the onboarding process, right? And you treat that as an open source repo where you accept contribution from others and you are the one managing the project. The other thing is how to sell. So it's very important that you keep the expectation low. I watched the video about the argument where they say under promise and over deliver. And finally, the last thing is to get the buy-in. But what do I mean with get the buy-in? So if your manager or whoever in the organization says, oh yes, that's a good idea, ask for their support. So what are they gonna do to support your initiative? Is just your initiative? How committed they're gonna be in this? So you can ask things for example, like are you gonna plan for an internal marketing? Who is gonna be involved? Are we gonna create a team of people focused on this, or a guild or whatever? And this is another important thing. If they are really serious, you can ask if they're gonna create the OSPO, so the open source program office. And finally, you can also ask to have that as part of your objectives, and why not also as part of the objectives of the team or multiple teams. It depends on your situation. So these were just 6 of the benefits you can get by the InnerSource adoption. Hope you liked the video. Let me know what do you think down in the comment, and see you in the next one. Bye!